Have you ever wondered how a single city, perched on 7 hills, managed to build one of the greatest empires the world has ever seen? How did Rome, starting from humble beginnings, conquer the known world? It's a story of ambition, brutal warfare, and brilliant strategy. Let us dive into the epic saga of how the Roman Republic transformed into the mighty Roman Empire. Our story begins around the 5th century BC. Rome was just a fledgling republic, fresh from overthrowing its kings. It was surrounded by powerful and hostile neighbors like the Etruscans to the north, and various Italic tribes all around. Survival wasn't a given, it was a daily struggle. But the Romans had a few secret weapons, an unbreakable sense of civic duty, a highly disciplined military, and an almost obsessive determination to never, ever accept defeat. The first major step was the unification of the Italian peninsula. This wasn't a quick or easy process. It took centuries of relentless warfare. The Romans fought the Samnites in a series of brutal wars that lasted over 50 years. They battled the Gauls, who famously sacked Rome in 390 BC, an event that scarred the Roman psyche and fueled their desire for security through expansion. What made Rome so successful in these early conquests? It wasn't just their legendary legions. It was also their political genius. When they conquered a people, they didn't always crush them. Instead, they often offered a form of citizenship or alliance status. This was revolutionary. They created a system where conquered peoples had a stake in Rome's success. They had to provide soldiers for the Roman army, but they also shared in the spoils of war and the security of the growing Roman state. This strategy of incorporation, rather than simple subjugation, allowed Rome to build a massive reserve of manpower that its rivals simply couldn't match. By the 64 BC, Rome controlled almost the entire Italian peninsula, setting the stage for its first major conflict outside of Italy. And that brings us to Carthage. Located in modern-day Tunisia, Carthage was a massive naval and trading power that controlled much of the western Mediterranean. The clash between these two rising powers was inevitable. The Punic Wars, a series of 3 conflicts between Rome and Carthage, were some of the most titanic struggles of the ancient world. The First Punic War was primarily a naval conflict. The Romans, who were land-based fighters, had to build a navy from scratch. They did this with typical Roman grit, reverse engineering a captured Carthaginian ship and adding their own invention, the Corvus Aborti bridge, that allowed their legionaries to fight on enemy ships as if they were on land. After more than 20 years of fighting, Rome emerged victorious, gaining control of Sicily, Sardinia, and Corsica. But Carthage wasn't finished. This is where one of history's most famous generals enters the scene, Hannibal Barca. In the Second Punic War, Hannibal did the unthinkable. He marched an army, complete with war elephants, from Spain, over the treacherous Alps, and into Italy. For over a decade, Hannibal rampaged across the Italian peninsula, inflicting a series of devastating defeats on the Romans, most famously at the Battle of Cannae, where he annihilated a massive Roman army. Rome was on the brink of collapse. Any other power would have surrendered, but the Romans refused to break. They adopted a strategy of avoiding direct battle with Hannibal while attacking his allies and supply lines. Then, a brilliant Roman general named Scipio Africanus took the fight to Carthage's home turf in Africa. This forced Hannibal to return to defend his city, where he was finally defeated by Scipio at the Battle of Zama in 100 BC. The Second Punic War was over. Carthage was stripped of its empire and military power. Rome was now the undisputed master of the western Mediterranean. With Carthage humble, Rome turned its attention eastward, to the successor kingdoms of Alexander the Great's Empire Macedon, the Seleucid Empire, and Ptolemaic Egypt. These were wealthy, sophisticated Hellenistic civilizations. The Romans, portraying themselves as liberators of the Greek city-states from Macedonian rule, systematically dismantled these kingdoms. The Macedonian Wars and the Roman-Syrian War saw the Roman legions prove their superiority over the famed phalanx formation. By the mid-2nd century BC, Greece and Macedon were Roman provinces, and the Seleucid Empire was a shell of its former self. This period of rapid expansion brought immense wealth, power, and territory to Rome, but it also brought immense problems. The republican system that was designed to govern a small city-state was struggling to manage a vast, multicultural empire. Vast fortunes were made by generals and governors, creating a new class of super-rich aristocrats. Meanwhile, the small farmers, who had been the backbone of the Roman army, were being driven off their land, unable to compete with the massive, slave-run estates called latifundia. This growing inequality led to intense social and political conflict. Figures like the Gracchi brothers tried to pass land reforms to help the poor, but they were both assassinated by the Senate elite. This violence marked a turning point. Political disputes were no longer settled by debate, but by daggers in the streets. The Republic was starting to crumble from within. The military itself was also changing. A general named Gaius Marius reformed the army, opening it up to landless citizens and promising them land and retirement benefits. This was a crucial shift. Soldiers' loyalty began to shift away from the state and towards their individual generals, who could guarantee their pay and retirement. Generals like Marius, Sulla, Pompey, and Crassus became powerful warlords, commanding private armies loyal only to them. The late Republic devolved into a series of brutal civil wars. Sulla marched his army on Rome itself, a shocking act that shattered all precedent. He declared himself dictator and published proscription lists, essentially death warrants for his political enemies. After Sulla, the first triumvirate was formed, an uneasy alliance between three powerful men: Pompey the Great, a renowned general; Marcus Crassus, the richest man in Rome; and a rising star named Gaius Julius Caesar. Caesar was a political and military genius of the highest order. He conquered all of Gaul, modern-day France, in a brilliant campaign, adding a vast and wealthy territory to Rome. His exploits made him incredibly popular with the people and his soldiers. But his ambition and power terrified the Senate. When the Senate, led by his rival Pompey, ordered him to disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen, Caesar faced a choice: obey and likely face prosecution and exile, or defy the Senate and plunge Rome into another civil war. In 49 BC, Caesar made his fateful decision. He led his legion across the Rubicon River, the northern boundary of Italy. The phrase crossing the Rubicon has meant making an irreversible decision ever since. The civil war was swift. Caesar defeated Pompey and his allies, chasing him all the way to Egypt. In just a few years, Caesar was the master of the Roman world. He was declared dictator for life and began a program of reforms. But his monarchical style and immense power were too much for many senators. On the Ides of March, 44 BC, a group of senators, crying "Sic semper tyrannis," thus always the tyrants, assassinated Julius Caesar in the Senate House. They thought they were saving the Republic. In reality, they had just paved the way for the empire. Caesar's murder didn't restore the old system, it unleashed another, even bloodier round of civil wars. Two main factions emerged. On one side were Caesar's assassins, Brutus and Cassius. On the other was the second triumvirate, formed by Caesar's loyal general Mark Antony, the powerful politician Lepidus, and Caesar's adopted son and heir, a young, clever, and utterly ruthless man named Octavian. Antony and Octavian hunted down and defeated Caesar's assassins at the Battle of Philippi. But their alliance was never going to last. The Roman world was divided between them, with Antony taking the rich eastern provinces and Octavian holding Italy and the West. Antony formed a political and romantic alliance with the Queen of Egypt, Cleopatra. In Rome, Octavian used brilliant propaganda to portray Antony as a decadent, Eastern-style monarch under the spell of a foreign queen, betraying his Roman heritage. The final confrontation came in 31 BC at the naval battle of Actium. Octavian's forces, commanded by his brilliant general Agrippa, crushed the combined fleets of Antony and Cleopatra. The pair fled back to Egypt, where they both took their own lives a year later. With their deaths, Octavian stood alone, the undisputed master of the entire Roman world. The civil wars that had plagued Rome for a century were finally over. But Octavian was smarter than his great-uncle Caesar. He knew that Romans still hated the idea of a king, so he performed a political masterstroke. In 27 BC, he went before the Senate and announced he was restoring the Republic. He claimed he was giving up all his extraordinary powers and returning control to the Senate and the people of Rome. It was a brilliant piece of theater. In gratitude, the Senate persuaded him to stay on and bestowed upon him the title Augustus, meaning the revered or illustrious one. In reality, while all the old offices and institutions of the Republic remained, Augustus held the true power. He controlled the most important provinces, commanded the legions, and held a combination of powers that gave him ultimate authority. He called himself princeps, or first citizen, not king or emperor. But an emperor is what he was. He had successfully disguised a monarchy in the robes of a republic. This system, known as the Principate, ushered in an unprecedented era of peace and prosperity known as the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. For the next 100 years, the empire was relatively stable, and its vast territories were united by a common law, culture, and language. Augustus's reign marked the official end of the Roman Republic and the birth of the Roman Empire. So, how did Rome become an empire? It wasn't a single event, but a long, complex process. It began with the tenacious conquest and clever integration of Italy. It was fueled by titanic wars against foreign powers like Carthage and the Hellenistic kingdoms, which brought immense wealth and territory. This expansion, however, shattered the old republican system, leading to a century of internal conflict, social unrest, and civil war. Finally, from the ashes of the republic, one man, Augustus, emerged to create a new political order, establishing a monarchy in all but name. It was a journey from a small city-state through a turbulent republic to a world-spanning empire that would shape the course of Western civilization forever. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this journey through Roman history fascinating, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the past. Let me know in the comments which empire you'd like to see us cover next. Until then, stay curious.